2 meters 72 centimeters or 8 feet 11 inches. Robert Wadlow was the tallest human ever measured. Does that qualify Robert to be a giant? Hell no! The giants we are going to talk about are creatures who are not considered as humans, or at least as Homo sapiens. According to biological anthropology, our race, Homo sapiens, appeared some 300,000 years ago. But obviously there were former human races. And a little before us, we had Homo neanderthalensis that appears 400,000 years ago and disappeared mysteriously 40,000 years ago. And Neanderthalensis was pretty similar than Homo sapiens. He was a bit stronger physically, but probably not taller. So can we say with another hominid called Homo erectus, and Homo habilis, and Australopithecus, who is even not yet member of the family Homo. So the more we travel back in time, the smallest our ancestors appear to be. So modern paleontology gave nothing about a clue on the identity of the giant. As it is the case in modern heroic fantasy movies, you can find giants in so many cultures and legends that we may almost say that along with dragons, gods, nature spirits, giants are just part of the human imaginary landscape. And if we follow the legends, giants could be three very different things: monstrous natural beings, gods, or our own ancestors. Let's review them one by one. In most mythologies, giants were represented as badass. For the ancient Greeks, for the Hebrews, and in the Nordic mythology, giants were extremely powerful, prone to chaos, and somehow the enemies of gods or of the good human beings. Greek giants were chaotic, but seriously, when you know the history, you have some empathy for them, because they come from a very traumatic origin. They emerge when the castration of Uranus by his own son spilled blood on Earth, and from the mixture of Uranus' blood and Gaia's Earth emerged a giant. And those giants with an immense power were very close to the goddess Gaia. And when Gaia was angry at the Olympians to have defeated another generation of gods called the Titans, she unleashed the giants against Zeus into a very famous war called the Gigantomachy. And in that specific war, all the Olympians took part, but not only them, not only the classical, very mysterious gods like Hecate or even the Moira took part in the massacre to liberate the world from the giants and to allow the Olympians with Zeus as a king to establish a new order. Then somehow the giants were the natural forces it was indispensable to defeat to install the order of Zeus. In the Nordic mythologies, the giants plays a role quite similar to the Greek, but even more important, because there were an original giant, Ymir, who begot the race of the giants, obviously, but also who got slaughtered by the Asgardian gods. And from his body, the gods have created the earth. So the Asgardian god led a big war against the giant and they defeat them. And somehow, like in the Greek, the giants were the power to be defeated before establishing a new order. But in the case of the Nordic, if there is no giant, there is no world at all. So they are even more important to the origin of the world. In the Hebrew Bible, everyone's have heard about Goliath, which was a Philistine warrior of very, very high dimension that David had to defeat with his sling, somehow to access to the throne. But what is much less known is that the Bible mentions also the existence of an antediluvian race of giants, the Nephilims. They were sons of gods initially, and you may translate it by probably angels who decide to beget children with humans. So it's a mixed race, semi-divine, and they were of an immense power, but they were also very bad and violent. And somehow they have corrupted mankind. They may be responsible for the mankind being so bad that the Almighty decided to wipe off the entire creation in the story of the deluge, and just to preserve Noah, his family, and all the animals in the ark, in sharp contrast to the badass giants presented in other mythologies. The Irish Celts present them as extremely positive and godly figures. What we call the Tuatha De Danann, or the tribe of Dana, is basically a tribe of God that settled down in Ireland, defeated other creatures, till one point they got themselves defeated and had to recede in some hills and become hidden. But that doesn't mean they were not interfering in the affairs of the mortals. They could be contacted in burial chambers, for instance. And they had the capacity to transmit to people crafts like magic or metallurgy. So they were of an extreme importance, and even new kings had to find elfic consort, which was basically a Tuatha De Danann. So for the Irish, the Tuatha De Danann, who were sometimes presented as giants, were not only extremely benevolent, and their role was to try to reestablish the cosmic balance, but also they were considered as the ancestor of the Irish nations. So for them, it was really the origins and the gods towards whom they can turn. So nowadays, there is still in the Celtic world a lot of activity around fairies. And basically, it is what remained to that cult. Because unlike those so-called great civilizations that try to establish a very human-like order, the Celts were deeply connected with nature. And so it's not a surprise that giants incarnating the force of nature were benevolent gods instead of badass. In her book, The Sacred Doctrine, Elena Petrovna Blavatsky gave a completely different narrative about the apparition of human species. For her, our story happened in 5 stages. And as the 2 first stages of humans were non-material, it's better not to talk about them. But the third race was what she called the Lemurian race. and is the first race that settled down in a flesh and bone body. So at the beginning, they had their capacity to come in and out of that body till they got somehow trapped in the body, and they were acquiring a mind which was at first very a collective mind, and slowly they got more and more individualized and more mental. And when they touched down into that mental mind, they were so divided within that they kind of lost their power. They lost also their alignment with nature, and they start to have and develop many vices. So it is said that they disappear for many reasons. One is being the degeneration of their race, moral degeneration, I mean. The other is natural cataclysm. And maybe the third one is that they have been replaced and maybe destroyed by the race number 4, which is the Atlantean. But anyway, that hypothesis, and let's call it a mythology, gives us an interesting rendering, another vision of giants, which were basically our ancestors. So in conclusion, giants are omnipresent in mythologies, but they may have a very different interpretation depending on which civilization they come from. For the civilization that values high civilization, education, creating of empire, the giants were just the enemies because they were too close to nature. They were the representative of the raw force of nature that should be vanquished to create a proper civilization. But for the nation who had respect for nature, who were seeking an alignment with the natural forces, giants were like gods, or they were like beneficent ancestors that were there to help us to learn to have a better contact with nature. And so were giants brutal creature, were giant ancestor, or were giant gods? They may have been all the three. We will never know anyway, because archaeology hasn't demonstrated anything in the domain. But there is one thing that is actual. You just need a glimpse on the movies and heroic fantasy movie to see that giants are still everywhere. So they are really part of our human imaginary landscape. So next time you stumble on them or you dream about giants, just ask to yourself, who are those giants? And are they completely gone, or they still live inside your imagination? That would be an interesting conversation to have, not to yourself, but with them.